The golden lights of the hotel lobby sparkled like stars. Polished floors reflected the glow of chandeliers, and well-dressed guests moved in and out carrying luggage and talking loudly. In the corner stood a grand piano shining black, its lid raised proudly as if waiting for the touch of a master. Through the glass doors, a cleaning lady entered with her young son. The boy was small, wearing clothes that looked a little worn but clean. His mother held a bucket in one hand and cleaning rags in the other. She looked tired but determined. She worked quietly every day so her son could stay in school. The boy's eyes widened as soon as he saw the piano. It was larger than anything he had ever seen. He slowed his steps, his gaze fixed on the keys that gleamed under the lights. He whispered softly, "Mama, look." But his mother tugged gently at his arm. "Not now, child, let me work. Sit quietly and wait." He nodded, but his eyes kept drifting back to the piano. Something inside him burned. He had seen videos of pianists on his old borrowed phone. He had listened to melodies in secret, teaching himself on a broken keyboard someone had once thrown away. Now the real thing stood in front of him. Calling him, at the reception desk the manager stood tall, a man in a perfect suit with slicked hair and a sharp smile that hid cruelty. He liked to remind the staff of their place. He liked to show guests how powerful he was. When he noticed the boy staring at the piano, he chuckled and shook his head. The boy, unable to resist, walked slowly toward the instrument, his small shoes tapping against the marble floor. He reached out one hand carefully as if touching something sacred. His fingers brushed a single key, and a soft note echoed through the lobby, pure and delicate. The manager's laughter rang out across the room. "Ha! Look at that," he shouted, drawing attention from the guests. "The janitor's boy thinks he can play the piano." People turned. Some smiled in amusement, others frowned. The boy froze, his cheeks burning, his hand hovering over the keys. His mother rushed to him, pulling his arm quickly, whispering, "Don't touch it, Hijo, it is not for us." But the manager waved his hand dramatically. No, let him try, maybe we'll be entertained," he said loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. "If he can play even one decent tune, I will kneel right here in front of everyone." The guests laughed, clapping their hands as if it was a game. Some whispered cruel things. "He'll embarrass himself," one said. "Poor child doesn't belong near such an instrument," another added. The mother's face turned red with shame. She tried again to pull her son away, but the boy looked at the piano with eyes that refused to leave. The manager grinned wider, enjoying the attention. "Go on, little one. Show us what you've got," he taunted, leaning against the desk. "Make me kneel if you can." His words echoed in the boy's ears like a challenge. The boy swallowed hard, his small heart pounding in his chest. He looked at his mother's worried face, then at the laughing crowd. He felt the weight of their doubt pressing down on him, yet he also felt something stronger rising inside. A quiet fire, a belief that the music inside him deserved to be heard. He whispered softly, "Please, Mama, let me try." His mother shook her head in fear. "They will laugh, Hijo. They will hurt you." But the boy held her hand tightly and said, "I am not afraid of laughter, I just want to play." The guests leaned closer, some recording with their phones already. Eager to see a poor boy fail, the manager smirked, his arms crossed, convinced this would end in humiliation that would make his joke even sweeter. Slowly, the boy pulled away from his mother's hand and walked toward the piano again, his small figure standing in front of the enormous instrument. The room fell into a strange hush, even the laughter quieted for a moment, everyone waiting. He pulled out the small stool and sat down, his legs dangling slightly because of his height. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling but steady with determination. The polished surface reflected his nervous but shining eyes. The manager spoke again, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "Remember my words, ladies and gentlemen. If he plays, I will kneel right here." More laughter followed. The boy closed his eyes, letting the noise fade. He placed both hands gently on the keys. And in that moment, the mockery still hung in the air. The crowd waited for a joke. The manager prepared for triumph. But deep inside the boy's heart, the first notes of a miracle were ready to be born. The boy's fingers hovered above the keys. The grand piano stood like a mountain before him, its polished black surface gleaming under the golden lights. The guests leaned closer, their laughter fading into whispers. The manager smirked at the sight, certain that the poor child would stumble and turn red with shame. The mother stood behind him, her hands twisting nervously, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please, Hijo, don't do this. They are mocking you. Come away before they hurt you more." But the boy shook his head softly, his eyes fixed on the keys, his heart beating fast. I just want to try. Mama, he whispered back. I just want to play. The manager clapped his hands loudly, interrupting the tender moment. Well, what are you waiting for, little one? He shouted, his voice echoing in the lobby. Show us the magic. Show us what a poor boy knows about music, or run away before you embarrass yourself. Guests chuckled, some pulling out their phones to record, eager to capture the scene for gossip. One guest leaned to another, whispering with a grin, This will be fun. He will press 2 wrong keys and everyone will laugh. Another added, Imagine the arrogance of touching such a piano when his mother cleans floors here. Their words were cruel, but they flowed like poison through the air. The boy heard the whispers. He felt the weight of every mocking stare. Yet deep inside he felt something stronger than shame. He felt the quiet fire that had grown inside him ever since he first touched the broken keyboard at home. He had no teacher, no lessons, only his heart and his ears, but those were enough to teach him the language of music. The manager puffed his chest out and repeated his vow, louder this time. If he truly plays the piano, I will kneel here in front of everyone, right here on the marble floor. The words sent a wave of laughter across the room. Guests clapped as though watching a show. The boy's mother covered her face in despair, but the boy's small hand settled gently on the keys. A hush fell across the lobby. The noise of suitcases rolling, the chatter of guests, even the footsteps of waiters seemed to fade. All eyes fixed on the small figure sitting at the grand instrument. The boy pressed one key softly. A pure note floated through the air, delicate and fragile. The manager snorted with laughter. That's it, one note, is that all? He mocked. But the boy ignored him. He pressed another, then another, his fingers forming a small pattern. The guests frowned, their smiles faltering slightly. It was not random noise, it was a beginning. The mother lowered her hands slowly, her eyes widening in surprise. She had heard her son play on the broken keyboard at home, but here on the grand piano the sound was deeper, richer. It was like hearing his heart speak for the first time. The manager waved his hand dismissively. Play then. Let us all see how far your little game goes. His voice was sharp, but beneath it was a hint of unease. The boy nodded softly, and for the first time, both hands rested on the keys. He took a deep breath, blocking out the whispers, blocking out the laughter, blocking out the fear. In his mind, he heard the melodies he had practiced alone in the dark nights when his mother thought he was asleep. He remembered the songs that made him dream of something more. The first notes rose gently. Forming a small tune, the lobby grew still. The laughter died completely, and the guest leaned closer, confused, then intrigued. His fingers moved again, faster, stronger, not with hesitation but with confidence. The tune began to form into something beautiful. The manager's smirk wavered, his eyebrows furrowed slightly. He expected broken sounds, he expected chaos. But what came instead was music. Real music, flowing like water. Soft yet commanding, a guest whispered, "Did you hear that?" Another leaned closer. "He knows what he's doing." Their voices were no longer mocking, they were uncertain, even curious. The boy's mother pressed a hand against her mouth, tears threatening to fall. She whispered under her breath, My child. Still the manager tried to laugh. He is copying, it is nothing. Any child can hit keys and make sound. But his voice trembled slightly. The guests no longer laughed with him. They were listening now. The boy's shoulders relaxed as the music filled him. The fear melted away with every note. His body swayed slightly as he played, his small figure merging with the giant piano as though the two belonged together. He was not trying to prove anything. He was not trying to win. He was only releasing what had lived inside him for years. The crowd had expected humiliation, but instead they felt something strange rising in their hearts, something they could not explain. The challenge had been spoken by the manager as a cruel joke, but the boy had accepted it with quiet bravery, and now the balance of the room had begun to shift. The poor child who was meant to be a clown was slowly becoming the center of respect. And as his fingers moved across the keys, the first real test had begun, not of the boy, but of the man who had sworn to kneel if he played. The boy's small fingers pressed gently into the keys, and the first notes floated into the air like whispers, soft and delicate, yet clear enough to silence the room. The golden lobby that had been filled with laughter only minutes ago now stood frozen. Every guest, every worker, even the waiters carrying trays paused to listen. The manager forced a chuckle, trying to break the silence. Little tricks, he said, waving his hand as if dismissing the sound. He will stumble in a moment. Watch. But his voice carried less certainty now. and his smirk felt thinner than before. The boy closed his eyes for a brief second, blocking out the faces staring at him. He remembered the long nights at home, when the world outside was loud and cruel, but inside his tiny room he had sat on the floor with a broken keyboard someone had thrown away. Half the keys didn't work. The sound was rough, but still he taught himself note by note, until the music became part of him. Now, sitting at the grand piano, the music flowed out of him with a strength he never felt before. His trembling hands steadied, his back straightened, his fingers moved again, pressing keys in a rhythm that built into something larger. The sound spread through the hotel lobby like a wave. It touched the walls, echoed in the glass, and softened even the hardest expressions in the crowd. Guests leaned forward without realizing it, their curiosity growing. They were no longer laughing. They were listening. His mother stood near the corner, her hands pressed tightly together, her heart pounding. She had always believed her child was special. She had heard him play melodies on the broken keyboard that made her cry, but she never thought anyone else would hear them. Not like this. Not on a piano that seemed too big, too important for someone like them. A little girl holding her father's hand whispered, "Papa, it's beautiful." Her father nodded silently, unable to take his eyes off the boy. Other guests exchanged glances, surprise written on their faces. The child they thought would embarrass himself was instead holding them captive with music. The manager shifted uncomfortably, his arms crossed tighter across his chest. He looked at the other guests and tried to laugh again. "Don't be fooled, it is luck, just luck." But his voice trembled slightly, and no one laughed with him this time. The boy continued, his melody growing stronger, more confident, his fingers gliding across the keys as if they belonged to him. He played not from memory alone but from feeling. Every note seemed to carry a story, a quiet power that words could not express. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others held their phones higher, recording every second, sensing this was no ordinary performance. This was something pure, something unexpected, something that would be remembered. The mother's eyes filled with tears as she whispered under her breath, "Play, Hijo, play from your heart," and the boy did, his small body swaying slightly with the rhythm, his feet barely touching the pedals, yet somehow he controlled the sound with a grace far beyond his age. The piano itself seemed to awaken, its deep voice answering the boy's touch, as if it had been waiting for someone who truly loved music to bring it to life. The harmony rose and fell, soft as a whisper, powerful as a storm. The guests began to applaud softly even before he finished. Unable to contain themselves, their mockery forgotten, their arrogance melted into awe. One woman dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering, "It feels like he is telling my story." Another guest muttered, "No lessons, no training, yet he plays like this. How is it possible?" The manager felt sweat forming at his temple, his smirk gone completely. He glanced at the crowd and realized he was losing them. The boy he thought would be laughed at was becoming the star of the night, and his own challenge, his careless promise, hung above him like a sword. Still, the boy continued, unaware of their shifting thoughts. His world was only the piano, only the music flowing through him. He was not playing for recognition, not for applause, but because the sound lived inside him and demanded to be released. The melody built to a gentle rise, his fingers dancing across the keys with surprising speed, his small shoulders moving with the rhythm, and for a moment the boy and the piano were one. No barrier between them, no laughter to wound him, only music that filled the air like light. When he opened his eyes briefly, he saw the faces of strangers transformed, no longer mocking but softened with wonder. And in that moment he realized something powerful. He had silenced them, not with anger, not with words, but with music, pure and undeniable. His mother's tears fell freely now. Her heart swelling with pride, she whispered, "You are not invisible anymore, my son." And though the boy could not hear her over the music, he felt it, the truth of it, in the way his hands no longer shook. The first notes, meant to be nothing but mockery in the eyes of the manager, had become the beginning of something unforgettable. The boy had crossed the invisible line between humiliation and triumph, and the crowd knew, though they could not yet admit it, that this was only the start. And as the last soft chord of his opening melody faded into the still air, the silence that followed was not filled with laughter, but with awe. The first notes had spoken louder than any words, and everyone in that golden lobby understood that the real performance had only just begun. The sound of the piano floated through the golden lobby, no longer timid, no longer hesitant, but alive with feeling. Each note poured from the boy's small hands like water from a clear stream, gentle at times, powerful at others. weaving into a melody that carried the weight of a story too deep for words. The guests who had gathered at first to laugh now stood frozen. Their expressions changed. Eyes wide, lips parted. They had come expecting a spectacle, a joke, a poor boy making noise on an expensive instrument. But what they received instead was something that touched their very souls. One man lowered his phone, forgetting to record, whispering softly, "This is real music." Another guest placed a hand over her chest, her breath trembling as the sound wrapped around her heart, and a child near the front smiled brightly, swaying gently to the rhythm as if carried away by the notes. The boy played with his eyes half closed, his fingers moving faster now, pressing the keys with growing confidence. His body swayed as if he and the piano were speaking in secret, the melody rising and falling like a conversation between heaven and earth. At the edge of the crowd, the boy's mother stood speechless, her hands trembling, her eyes glistening with tears. She had seen her son's passion at home. She had heard the tunes on a broken keyboard that could barely carry sound. But this was different. This was music unleashed. This was her child standing before the world, not as the son of a cleaning lady, but as something greater. The guests whispered among themselves, but their tones were different now. No longer cruel, no longer mocking. "He's a prodigy," one said with disbelief. "How could someone so young play like this?" another whispered. "He plays better than trained musicians, I've heard." The piano's voice grew louder as the boy struck the keys with rhythm and grace, his small legs barely reaching the pedals, yet somehow he controlled the sound as if he had practiced for years. The lobby seemed transformed. No longer a place of arrogance and luxury, but a concert hall filled with magic. The manager stood stiff behind the reception desk, his arms crossed, his face red with unease. He glanced nervously at the crowd, their attention no longer his, their respect no longer his to control. He had promised to kneel if the boy played, and now, with every passing second, the boy's music pulled him closer to that humiliation. Still he tried to laugh, his voice sharp but weak. "He is only lucky, you'll see. He will stumble soon." But no one listened to him. No one cared for his words. Their eyes were fixed on the boy, their ears drowned in the melody. The crowd grew larger as more guests walked in from the entrance, drawn by the sound that spilled into the streets. Waiters stopped carrying trays. Bellboys stood with luggage forgotten. Even the guards at the doors turned their heads to listen. The music rose into a high note that lingered in the air like sunlight piercing through clouds, and when it fell into a soft, gentle pattern, many in the crowd felt chills running down their spines. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. Tears slipping down her cheeks, she whispered, "I don't know why, but it feels like he is telling my story through music." The boy's mother gasped when she noticed that even the hotel's resident pianist, a tall man in a black suit, had stepped forward from the corner where he usually entertained the guests. His eyes were wide, his jaw clenched as he listened, and he muttered under his breath, "This is genius. Pure genius." Guests turned toward him. Surprised, they knew he was a professional, a man who had studied for years, and his words only deepened their awe if he called the boy a genius. Then the truth was undeniable. The boy continued to play, unaware of the growing storm around him, unaware of the change in the room. He was lost in the music, lost in the beauty of sound. His world narrowed to the keys under his fingers and the stories they carried. The crowd no longer whispered, they no longer laughed. Many of them simply listened in silence, some with tears, some with smiles, some with expressions of awe they hadn't worn in years. The boy had awakened something inside them, something they had forgotten. The power of pure music, even the manager, though his pride burned. Pure music, even the manager, though his pride burned, felt the weight of the notes pressing against his heart. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, but the truth gnawed at him. He knew what the crowd already saw clearly. The boy was no joke, the boy was extraordinary. As the piece reached a gentle pause, the lobby filled with silence once more. But it was not the silence of expectation. It was the silence of respect, the silence of people holding their breath, afraid to break the spell. And then softly the boy began again, shifting into a second melody, one filled with deeper emotion, richer notes. His small body leaning into the keys, his face calm, his heart open. He was no longer just playing, he was performing, and the crowd was no longer mocking. They were awakening. The janitor's son had come to the piano as a child to be mocked, but now he was rising as a musician, as an artist, and the crowd, once filled with arrogance, now bowed silently before the truth of his gift. And as the boy continued, the awakening of the crowd was complete. No one doubted, no one mocked, and for the first time, The arrogant manager felt the ground trembling beneath his careless promise. The boy's fingers danced across the keys with a confidence that surprised even himself. Every note seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, a place where joy and pain mixed together and turned into music. The golden lobby, once filled with laughter and mockery, was now silent except for the sound of the piano. The guests leaned forward in awe, some with their eyes closed, some with their phones recording but none speaking. The melody had captured them completely. They were no longer watching a poor boy prove himself. They were witnessing something far greater, a performance that touched the heart. The boy pressed the keys harder now, his body swaying gently, his head tilting as he listened to the sound he created. He was not playing from sheet music. He was not repeating lessons. He was playing from memory and feeling. Every rise and fall in the melody was his own creation, shaped by years of secret practice on a broken keyboard. The music grew stronger. Powerful chords filled the air, echoing against the tall walls, rolling across the marble floor like thunder. Then just as quickly the sound softened again. Delicate notes trickling like raindrops, the guests felt their chests tighten, their emotions rising and falling with every shift. One woman in a red dress whispered, her voice trembling, "It feels like the piano is alive." Her companion nodded slowly, unable to look away. A man in a business suit wiped his eyes discreetly, embarrassed by the tears he didn't expect, while a young girl near the front leaned against her mother and whispered, "Mama, he plays like angels." At the corner of the room, the professional pianist of the hotel watched with his arms crossed, his expression tense. He had been trained for years, studied under masters, performed for wealthy crowds. Yet this boy, with no teacher, no stage, no recognition, was producing something that felt more real than anything he had ever played. He muttered under his breath, "This is no child. This is an artist." The manager shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming at his temple. His earlier laughter now gone completely. He could feel the eyes of the guests turning toward him every few seconds, reminding him of his careless vow, his promise to kneel if the boy played. His heart sank lower with every note, because the boy was not just playing, he was creating a masterpiece. The music swelled into a powerful passage, the boy's small hands striking the keys with speed and precision that seemed impossible. The melody climbed higher and higher, until it felt as if the very ceiling of the hotel vibrated with the sound. Guests gasped softly, their emotions overflowing. Then, as if pulling them back down to earth, the boy shifted again, his touch gentle, his notes tender. The sound fell into a soft melody filled with warmth, and in that moment, many in the crowd felt as if they were listening to their own childhoods, their forgotten dreams, their lost joys. His mother stood near the wall, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed tightly over her mouth. She had always believed in him, but she had never imagined the world would see him like this. She whispered softly, "Play, my son, let them hear you." And the boy's fingers seemed to answer her prayer. The guests no longer recorded for entertainment. Those who held phones kept them steady, not wanting to miss a single second. But others lowered their devices, realizing they wanted to experience it with their hearts, not through a screen. The manager glanced at the crowd, panic rising in his chest. The more they admired the boy, the closer he came to his humiliation. He had sworn to kneel if the boy played, and now he could feel the weight of dozens of eyes ready to hold him to his word. His pride screamed for escape, but his fear rooted him to the spot. The boy's melody climbed once more, his small body leaning into the piano, his face calm yet glowing with something pure. The sound was no longer just music. It was a declaration, a voice louder than words, telling everyone in the room that talent cannot be silenced, that greatness can come from anywhere. Guests began to applaud softly even before the piece ended. Unable to contain themselves, their claps blending with the sound of the piano. Some stood, their faces glowing with awe. Others simply closed their eyes, holding the moment as tightly as they could. The professional pianist, his pride humbled, stepped forward slowly, his voice trembling with respect. "He is not playing a song," he said softly, loud enough for those near him to hear. "He is creating one." His words spread quickly through the crowd, adding weight to the truth they already felt. Finally, after what felt like forever, the boy struck the last chord, a deep resonant note that lingered in the air. Echoing through the silence, his hands fell still, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, and for a long moment no one moved. No one even dared to clap, as if afraid to break the spell. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then louder, until the entire lobby shook with the sound. Guests stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some whistling, some wiping tears from their cheeks. His mother sobbed openly, her pride too strong to hide. The boy looked around shyly, his cheeks red. He had not played for applause, but the sight of people clapping, standing, and crying made his heart swell for the first time. The music he carried alone inside his heart had touched the world, and though the applause thundered around him, the loudest sound in the manager's ears was the echo of his own words. "If he can play, I will kneel," words spoken in arrogance. Words that now returned to crush his pride. The masterpiece was complete, but the story was far from over. The boy had proven himself, and now the crowd waited for the promise to be kept. The thunder of applause filled the golden lobby. Guests stood from their seats clapping, cheering, some with tears running down their faces. The sound rose like a storm, echoing against the high ceiling. Every eye was on the boy sitting shyly at the piano, his cheeks red, his small hand still resting on the keys. But while the crowd celebrated him, one man felt the walls closing in around him. The hotel manager, who had laughed loudest, who had mocked most, stood frozen at the reception desk, his face pale and damp with sweat. The words he had spoken earlier rang in his ears like chains he could not escape. "If he plays, I will kneel right here in front of everyone," the guests remembered, and soon their applause began to change. The sound of clapping mixed with voices, whispers at first, then louder. One man called out, "The manager promised to kneel," another shouted, "Yes." We all heard him. Laughter spread across the crowd, but this time it was not directed at the boy. It was directed at the man who had ridiculed him. The manager shook his head quickly, forcing a weak laugh. "It was only a joke," he said, his voice trembling. "Surely no one expects me to—" But the crowd cut him off, their voices rising together. "Kneel, kneel." The chant began softly, but it grew, filling the lobby, echoing against the music that still lingered in their hearts. The boy's mother clutched her son tightly. Her face a mix of pride and fear, she whispered, "Don't look, Hiho. Don't listen to them." But the boy raised his eyes quietly, his innocent gaze falling on the manager. He had not wanted humiliation. He had not wanted revenge. All he wanted was to play. But the promise had been made, and now the crowd demanded justice. The professional pianist stepped forward, his voice steady. "A promise is a promise," he said firmly. "You mocked him. You mocked his family. You mocked music itself. Now honor your words." His authority silenced some of the noise, but it strengthened the demand. The manager's lips trembled. His pride screamed inside him. He was a man used to commanding respect, a man who enjoyed power. To kneel before a poor boy, the son of a cleaning woman, would be the deepest shame. He looked around desperately for support, but found none. The staff looked at him coldly. The guests glared at him with expectation. Even his own assistant stepped back. Unwilling to defend him, he stammered again. I didn't mean it," his voice breaking, but the crowd shouted louder. "Kneel! Kneel!" Their chant beat like drums in his ears. He felt trapped, cornered, and every second stretched longer. Finally, the boy spoke, his voice soft but clear. "You don't have to kneel for me." The room fell silent at his words. His eyes were wide and innocent. "I only wanted to play. I only wanted them to hear," his words struck the crowd. Many gasped softly, touched by his humility. The boy who had been mocked and laughed at still carried no bitterness. Humility. The boy who had been mocked and laughed at still carried no bitterness. But the crowd was not satisfied. Their voices rose again. "No, he must kneel." "He promised," one man shouted. "If he does not, then his words mean nothing." The pressure crushed the manager further. The boy's mother placed her hands on his shoulders, whispering, "Do not worry, Hiho, you have already won. You have already proven yourself." But the boy looked down at his hands and whispered, "It is not about winning, Mama, it is about truth." The crowd surged again, the noise heavy, the cameras flashing, and at last, the manager's strength broke. His knees wobbled beneath him. His pride fought desperately, but the weight of dozens of eyes was too much. He sank slowly to the marble floor, his suit brushing against the polished stone, his head lowering in defeat. Gasps filled the air, then cheers erupted louder than before. The crowd clapped again. Some shouted, some laughed. The image of the powerful manager kneeling before the poor boy would stay in their memories forever. The boy sat frozen at the piano, his eyes wide, his small chest rising and falling quickly. He had not wanted this, he had not asked for it, but now it had happened. The world had seen pride bow before innocence, arrogance fall before truth. The manager clenched his fists tightly, his face burning red, his pride shattered into pieces. He looked up at the boy with a mixture of anger and shame, but he could not undo what had been done. His promise had chained him, and the crowd had forced him to keep it. His mother cried quietly, holding her son tightly as the applause shook the room once more. She whispered through her tears, "They see you now, Hijo. They see what I have always known." And the boy leaned into her arms, his heart beating faster, unsure if this was victory or something greater. The professional pianist placed a hand over his chest and bowed slightly toward the boy, a gesture of respect that no one missed. And the crowd, seeing it, clapped even harder. The boy had not only proven himself, he had gained the respect of those who understood the true weight of music. The humiliation of the manager was complete, and the boy, who had come only as the son of a cleaning woman, now stood taller than any pride could have imagined. The golden lobby of the hotel trembled with noise. The applause still roared, the chants still echoed, and the flash of cameras burned like lightning. The image of the powerful manager on his knees before a poor boy was something no one expected to see. Yet here it was, alive, undeniable, unforgettable. The boy sat quietly at the piano, his small hands resting on his lap, his cheeks red, his heart pounding fast. He had not asked for this. He had not wanted to see a man bow before him. All he wanted was to play, to release the music that lived in his chest. But now he had become the center of something far larger. The manager's knees pressed against the cold marble floor, his back bent forward, his face burning red, sweat dripping down his temple. The laughter he once used as a weapon had abandoned him, now replaced by the mocking eyes of the crowd. His promise had chained him, his pride had broken him, and his humiliation was complete. "Lower your head," one man shouted from the crowd. Others echoed him, "Keep your word." The chant grew stronger again. The guests demanded full surrender, and the cameras recorded every second, ready to spread this image far beyond the walls of the hotel. The boy's mother stepped forward quickly, placing her arm around her son, whispering, "Don't watch, Hijo. Don't look at him. Your music has already spoken. You don't need this." But the boy lifted his head slowly, his eyes filled not with pride, not with triumph, but with something gentler, something that confused the crowd. The boy whispered softly, his voice carrying enough to silence the room, "You don't have to kneel anymore. I forgive you." His words floated like fragile glass into the heavy air. The guests gasped. Some frowned, some looked shocked. How could a child show mercy when a grown man had shown him nothing but cruelty? The manager raised his head slightly, his eyes wide, his chest heaving. The words pierced him deeper than humiliation itself. This boy, this child he had mocked, pitied him enough to offer forgiveness. The shame was heavier than stone. But the crowd was not satisfied. They shouted again, "No, stay down, you made the vow, honor it." Their voices crashed like waves, forcing the manager to bow his head lower. His pride shattered further with each second. The professional pianist stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow across the piano. He looked at the boy with respect, then at the manager with disappointment. "Sometimes," he said softly, but his voice carried through the room. "Kneeling is not humiliation, it is recognition. Recognition that greatness can come from anywhere." His words stilled the room for a moment, and even the boy felt his heart stir. The manager's head lowered fully, his hands pressed against the marble. The chant of the crowd faded into silence. Everyone simply stared. It was not just a kneeling now, it was surrender. It was a man forced to face his own arrogance. The boy rose slowly from the stool, his small figure walking toward the man. His mother gasped softly, but she did not stop him. The boy stood before the kneeling manager, the crowd silent, watching, waiting. He placed his small hand gently on the man's shoulder, his voice soft but steady. "I didn't play to make you kneel. I played because music lives inside me, and no one should laugh at something they don't understand." His words were simple, yet they struck the crowd like thunder. Many bowed their heads, ashamed of their earlier laughter. The manager trembled, his throat dry, his eyes burned with tears he fought to hold back. He whispered hoarsely, "I was wrong." The boy nodded once, stepping back toward his mother, his face calm, his innocence untarnished even in the middle of triumph. The crowd erupted in applause again, this time not just for the music, but for the boy's heart, his mercy, his purity. The guests clapped with more force, some shouting his name, others cheering. The boy's mother pulled him close, sobbing openly, "You are my pride, Hijo. You are my light." The professional pianist bowed deeply toward the boy, his voice breaking. "Today, we have seen something rare, not just music, but greatness of spirit." The crowd nodded, their respect no longer a question. The boy had given them more than a performance, he had given them a lesson. The manager remained on his knees a moment longer, The camera still flashing, his shame sealed forever. Then he stood slowly, his body heavy, his eyes unable to meet anyone's gaze. He adjusted his suit with shaking hands, but no adjustment could fix what had broken inside him. The boy, however, returned to his mother's side, clutching her hand tightly, his face shy, his heart racing, but his spirit calm. He had not fought for applause. He had not demanded respect. Yet he had received both and more. The kneeling was complete, and though it was born of arrogance and pride, it ended as a symbol, a reminder to everyone in that room, and to everyone who would see the videos later, that greatness cannot be measured by wealth, nor silenced by mockery. And as the crowd began to chant his name with warmth instead of laughter, the boy lowered his eyes humbly, his cheeks red, and whispered softly to his mother, "I just wanted to play." The golden lobby slowly returned to calm, but the memory of what had happened would never leave it. Guests still murmured in excitement, their voices filled with disbelief. Some replayed the video clips they had recorded, the image of the manager kneeling spreading from one phone to another like fire, while the boy, small and shy, stood quietly by his mother's side, clutching her hand. The mother's cheeks were wet with tears, her chest rising and falling as if she had run a long race. She bent down to her son, pressing her forehead gently against his, whispering, "You have changed everything today, Hijo. You have shown them what I have always seen in you." The boy smiled softly, though his eyes were still wide, as if he had not yet understood the greatness of what he had done. The professional pianist stepped forward slowly, his steps heavy with respect. He bowed deeply before the child, something no one had ever seen him do. His voice carried through the quieting room. "I have studied music for years, trained under masters and performed for kings. But today I bow to you, because your music is pure, it comes from the soul. And that is rarer than gold." Gasps filled the air. The crowd clapped again, their respect now unquestionable. The boy lowered his head humbly, whispering, "I only played what I felt." But those simple words carried more weight than grand speeches. The pianist nodded, his eyes shining. "And that is why it reached us all." The guests who had laughed earlier now approached with softer expressions. Some apologized quietly, some offered handshakes, others simply looked at the boy with awe. One woman said, "Your music reminded me of my mother. I cried because I remembered her." Another whispered, "You made me feel young again, like I was dreaming." Each word struck the mother's heart with pride. Her son had not only silenced laughter, he had awakened memories in strangers. The manager stood off to the side, his face pale, his pride broken. He could not escape the whispers, the pointing fingers, the recording phones. He had been powerful in this place, feared by his staff, respected by guests. But now he was the man who had mocked a child, the man who had knelt. No suit or tie could cover the humiliation. He lowered his head and left quietly, each step heavy with shame. The boy did not watch him go. He only looked at the piano one last time, his small fingers brushing the keys softly. Almost like saying goodbye, he whispered to his mother. Keys softly, almost like saying goodbye, he whispered to his mother. "One day I want to play again, but not here. I want to play where music belongs." She hugged him tightly, whispering back, "You will, Hijo, you will." News spread quickly. Faster than anyone imagined, by the next morning, videos of the boy's performance filled every corner of the internet. People watched with amazement, the comments flooded in, calling him a prodigy, a genius, a gift to music. Television channels replayed the clips. Newspapers printed his picture. Headlines screamed about the boy who made a manager kneel. But the boy did not care for fame. He still sat in his small room at home, his notebook full of songs and melodies he dreamed of playing. He smiled quietly at the thought that now, maybe, the world would let him. Offers began to arrive, schools, music academies. Even sponsors wanted to support him. Some offered scholarships, others wanted to meet him. The boy's mother stared at the letters with wide eyes, unable to believe it. She had worked all her life cleaning floors, and now doors were opening for her son that she had never dared to imagine. One evening, the professional pianist visited their small home, his tall frame filling the doorway. He bowed to the mother respectfully, then knelt slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "I came not as a teacher, but as a student," he said. "I want to help guide you, not because you need it, but because the world will try to shape you, and I want you to stay pure." The boy nodded shyly, and the mother cried again, grateful beyond words. The boy's future began that day. Not with riches, not with power, but with recognition, with love, with the respect of those who once mocked him. He carried no anger, no revenge, only the music in his heart and the dream to share it with the world. And in every retelling of the story, people remembered the promise, the arrogance of a man who laughed, the courage of a child who played, and the kneeling that followed. But more than that, they remembered the music, the way it silenced laughter, the way it touched hearts, the way it proved that greatness can rise from the most unexpected places. As the boy sat by the piano once more in his new school, his fingers ready to play, he whispered softly to himself, "I just wanted them to hear." And with the first note, his journey into the future truly began.